discussion. And I think from each of those discussions, we have had certain takeaways and decided to dig a little bit deeper into those issues that came up, either as opportunities or challenges, So for this particular discussion, it's twofold. One, really, I think, digging in a little bit more deeper to look at what are the infrastructural enablers that we specifically need to have if we are going to look at a more collaborated, more connected South Asia green energy grid. What is it that we are going to look at? There are issues of infrastructure, stability of infrastructure. There are issues of ability to comprehensively define trade agreements while sharing energy. So there's the economic aspect, there's the infrastructural aspect. Alongside it is also the political aspect as to where does this whole discourse get positioned? Is it more feasible bilaterally, trilaterally, multilaterally? Should it be placed within existing economic groupings like the BIMSTEC? Would that make sense? And these are questions that we would like to explore in this discussion today and really hear from the experts and from the multiple, places that you all are coming into this conversation with the investments and work that you all have done. How would you think that moving forward, we can add best value to the existing conversations and also to the existing initiatives, both? I also think that this has become much more imperative today, as we were just talking before, the formal conversation happened in light of COVID. All countries globally, I think this has been unprecedented kind of a global economic hit and a global social reconfiguration at various levels, from the micro to the absolute macro meso levels. And all of this is also linked to the future as we look to the future, however it unfolds post-COVID. Nobody can specifically say. There are a lot of studies. But as we look to the future, it's going to be important for us to look at, is this creating an opportunity for us to really look at the course of development, the course of economic development that's defined by a more sustainable energy? When I say sustainable, by an energy that is less detrimental to the overall health of the globe and the earth, and in a way will reduce the chances of other health pandemics that are looming ahead if we go the same way that we have been pushing ourselves of late. These questions, I think, that are more important to answer today. So green energy becomes a critical area to explore as an engine for future growth, and to see how much that can happen, what's the possibility. It also becomes an important agenda item to discuss in relation to its contribution to really preserving the earth and the ecology and the ecosystem, and therefore also reducing any kind of serious health adversities that arise out of a planet which is falling sick. You can't have healthy people in a sick planet. So I think the challenges are multifold. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from our extremely august group of speakers who are here today. And for us, whatever we bring out from starting from the SAGE Summit to this conversation, we will be curating it into a policy brief and putting it out for everybody to add to and to take it up for discussions in the forums and the institutions that you all are engaged in. So with that, I think I'd like to open this conversation up, and I'm going to hand over the mic to Anindya, who's going to take us through the ground rules. And I really look forward to listening to the conversation and adding to it as we move forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nandita. Good morning, everyone. I'm Anindya Upadhyay, Senior Consultant for Renewable Energy at the Asia Foundation. Before I formally begin the webinar, I have a couple of housekeeping announcements. Participants will remain on mute and videos are disabled. You will be able to see and hear the speakers only. Please put your questions for the speakers in the Q&A box at the bottom. The speakers will take some of these questions in the Q&A session later. I encourage you all to introduce yourselves in the chat box, and recording of this webinar will be made available later. So I welcome you all again to the Asia Foundation's webinar, Ushering in a New Era, South Asia Regional Development via Green Power Cooperation. Taking discourse building forward on green energy cooperation in South Asia. This is our latest webinar, which seeks to explore why the region is lagging behind in electricity trading, despite huge potential for the same. The underlying argument is that green power trade can help attain energy security for South Asia from sustainable sources, addressing development and environment goals for a region most vulnerable to climate change. So I'm delighted to introduce an accomplished panel of speakers who are here to discuss two topics: infrastructural enablers and frameworks to boost green energy trade in South Asia. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Rajesh Mediratha, Director, Indian Energy Exchange; Dr. Priyanta Vijaytunga, Director, South Asia Energy Division, Asian Development Bank; Mr. Anurag Mishra, Energy Team Leader at USAID Indo-Pacific Office; Ms. Mahua Acharya, Asia Director, Climate Policy Initiative; Dr. Rahul Tongia, Senior Fellow, Center for Social and Economic Progress; Dr. Prabir De, Professor and Coordinator, ASEAN India Center, RIS; and Dr. Prabal Ghosh, Assistant Director at IRADE. A very warm welcome to all. So I'll be coming to each panelist with a specific question, but others, please feel free to add to the discussion with your points at any time. Before starting the discussion, here is our first audience poll. There will be two more poll questions at the end of each of the two topics. May I request my colleagues to flash the poll question, please? Okay. So I will now kickstart the discussion by asking Dr. Vijaytunga if he could throw some light on this three-part question. What have been the historical challenges to South Asia regional power trade? What's been the improvement till now, and what needs to be done from this point on? You have 5 minutes to answer this.
Anindya, thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. Good afternoon to those who are joining from other time zones. It's good to be here and good to talk about regional cooperation in the energy sector, something which was close to my heart for many, many years. Looking back, actually the historical challenges, naturally one goes in first is obviously the political commitment. Political commitment at the highest level is very, very important for regional cooperation. That's obvious. I'm sure it's obvious to everybody, and that has been historically a challenge. But the things have evolved quite a lot in recent years, and it's moving forward as a result. And the other, obviously, lack or absence of regional infrastructure, cross-border infrastructure. And naturally, if you have to trade, you have to have cross-border infrastructure, because we are still relying on hard physical infrastructure across the borders to transfer electricity from one area to another. And the third, but not the least, is awareness. Frankly speaking, historically, the awareness of the use and the benefits of regional cooperation was not as much. And over the years, we have been able to develop that knowledge through various knowledge sharing programs, within the region and outside the region, through technical visits and so on. So awareness has risen quite a lot over the last so many years or couple of decades in terms of benefits of regional cooperation and how to go about reaping these benefits of regional cooperation. So these were historical challenges, but those challenges have been addressed or kind of faced and overcome over the years to a certain extent, but not totally. And as you can see, in certain geographical regions, sub-regions within the Indian subcontinent, we have overcome between certain countries, but certain other countries we may not have overcome these challenges. So that's something which we need to keep in mind. And the other most important thing is that the realization that India is at the center of, geographically at the center of the region. So India has a major role to play. And I think historically that was not as much recognized and highlighted as against what it is now. Now India has realized and the importance of its intervention geographically, because it's at the center and taking a lead role in the regional cooperation in the energy sector and regional trade. So that realization has helped in recent times to move forward in regional cooperation activities. Of course, multilateral banks like us, we have been helping through various regional institutions, also our own regional programs. But this political commitment, the realization of India, the need to take lead in this has changed a lot. So we'll have to move forward along those lines, as we have been, and maybe faster than what it has been, so that we can achieve what we want in the near future. Thank you very much. I'll stop there and leave the rest to others. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else wants to add to what Dr. Wijayatunga has said? Okay. Okay, so I'll move to Anurag Mishra. Anurag, are you able to?
Anindya, I can just make one small point.
Yes,
we have been saying that this green to promote green energy, the trade for promoting trade, green energy is the focus, but that need not be always the case. I think we are talking of a market here, electricity trade, and it should be driven by little market forces also. Our research at IRADE has shown that if the trade between what happens between India and Bangladesh is essentially a that's not requires green energy, but the trade that will happen between India and Nepal and Bhutan, that would be essentially driven by green energy. So there are different aspects of trade also in this region. However, if you take the larger BIMSTEC region, then what is at stake is the hydro potential. That's the major thing, and that is likely to replace the fossil fuel. And the climate commitments that these countries are taking, that is likely to push the trade in favor of the hydro. I think that point needs to be emphasized here. I would like to just make that point. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Ghosh, for this. So my next question is to Mr. Anurag Mishra. Are you able to throw some light on why are investments in cross-border energy assets still lagging? And if you could point at measures that could enable them.
Sure. Thanks for the question. But I will also like to respond to the previous point made by, I think, Rahul. I didn't see him on the screen. I think while we may say that, okay, you are not actually trading green power across boundaries, but cross-border electricity trade is definitely going to enable overall deployment. So if India is able to kind of figure out ways that it has access power during certain time of a day or is short of during another times of hour, you can actually trade that power. So you don't see whether it's kind of green power or brown power, but whether the cross-border trade enables overall deployment of green energy. I'll say yes to that, and that is probably one of the unreliable which is kind of evolving over the time. In terms of cross-border infrastructure, I think the challenge mostly what we have seen is figuring out what is the kind of a real benefit of this investment. So infrastructure investments, these are long-term investments. And the two sides which are going to invest into this have to figure out what is that return they're going to get off it. And in some cases, the returns may not be immediate, but in the longer term, they may. So just the example of discussions between India and Nepal, if we are trying to do a new infrastructure today, maybe initially that will help India to export more and more power to Nepal to meet their kind of shortages. But that the same infrastructure, once Nepal is able to develop more of their hydro resources, can be used to kind of supply power back to India and kind of fill in the gaps where India feels as we are going forward with a lot of solar into our system. So I think that is one issue which is coming out. And that is where the country governments have to kind of work together in understanding this and accordingly figured out kind of a right mechanisms to be able to kind of share the cost of these investments. And these are like not kind of a small investments, and these are also very long term. So I think that is what is something quite critical to look at. But then now looking at the way we are kind of focusing more and more on green power across the region. Most of the countries have set targets. Some of the countries even set going for 100% renewables. How these kind of infrastructure help those countries? We recently saw that India kind of announced this new study. They call it like One World, One Sun, One Grid, trying to figure out how infrastructure can enable more and more green power across the region, but then also enhance their capacity or ability to get to a higher renewable energy targets over the time. this now in this context, you have to see that the infrastructure, what you're developing is fit for meeting the needs for kind of managing the system, which is high on renewables, which is what we are seeing across in India as part of our greening the grid program, because that's where you see that the infrastructure should also be equipped and also managed in a way that you're able to deal with a large amount of variable renewable energy to the system. So I'll just kind of stop there with my initial thoughts and then maybe respond to initial questions we have. Over.
Okay, thank you. So I'll kind of take this discussion forward and ask Ms. Mahua Acharya, given India's large renewable installation and targets, what are the kind of investments that can enable energy storage and balancing power assets in the region that could help bolster green electricity trade in a way that supplier and procurer nations benefit mutually?
Thank you, Anindya, and thank you, Nandita and colleagues, for firstly inviting me to this panel. When I saw this, I thought, wow, this is excellent, because this is really what is so timely. I mean, for so many years, all I keep hearing about is how much money must go into renewables and must go into renewables. And I'm glad the discussion is changing to something that a lot of people call a little technical. So I'm happy that Anurag brought this up. Let me add a couple of thoughts first to the investment question. CPR just produced a study to understand how much money went into green finance. Of course, it's 1 year backdated, but it shouldn't make that much of a difference. And 80% of that was renewable energy, and 70% of that money was solar. Yet, that entire piece of money was only 10% of what's needed. So, a lot of discussion often goes into saying, this is how much money is needed, and then we go and we start talking about risk, which is correct. But in fact, I think in a number of cases now, and increasingly, because our grids are becoming unstable, the shift for money, the need for money is a little bit more complicated. Grids are becoming unstable. Often what tends to happen and is happening is we're talking about pumped hydro. We need to bring in the discussion on batteries, which just means that I'm beginning to feel now more and more that from an investment point of view, the discussion should shift around better business models. Investment discussions around money, increasingly I'm now getting convinced when I talk about better business models, for many years we've been saying public and private money must come together and must come closer. And I think we know that public and private money, well, they're trying to come closer, but it's difficult. They both speak very different languages. One looks for profit, one looks for impact. And it's really, really difficult because they both believe that they make impact. But however, we've reached a stage where our business models now are fundamentally important. So let me take, since Anurag brought in grid stability, we know that technologically speaking, batteries are probably the best suited for all sorts of stability and grid management. We also know that, yes, we are on a downward curve for batteries. And so, one side of me can say, well, I'll just wait to see where that curve tails out and then I'll make an investment. Or if I take a risk now, what happens? It's what happened to solar. Some of our projects were locked in much higher costs. But unless you make the effort now to look at things a little bit differently, meaning, can we use things like batteries for multiple services? And when that happens, your investment thinking is no longer about how much money do I need. It's about, well, how can I make this solution commercially appropriate? So this group over here that you've nicely pulled together have so many pieces of the puzzle in it. ADB is here. Multilaterals have done this. I used to be at the World Bank 20 years ago. This is what the multilaterals do and did, and have the ability to push a certain sector. And when I mean that batteries, what all can it do? It can do many things. It can produce power in about 5 seconds. It can stay on demand for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever. There's lots of models out there that are sprouting. The one part that gets left behind, and it got left behind for 10 years and maybe more, is carbon finance, is carbon credits. For many years that I worked in carbon markets, carbon money was kept as a little upside that came well after the fact, and it was in US dollars and very nice, healthy pocket money. But really, we're now in a situation where carbon credits, even at $5 a ton, for this sort of stuff, makes a difference between 5 and 10%, or even 5 and 8%. Let me be conservative. Even at $5. So in the last 15 years, what has happened in parallel, countries have started to take climate change pretty seriously. Companies have started to take it quite seriously. This net zero initially, I mean, there was a skeptic in me thinking, my God, if a petroleum company is going net zero, is this real? I mean, is this the world that I entered when I started working? Well, they are seriously going net zero, which in other words, they're saying that if they're going to buy the carbon credits, that contract can be respected and that contract can be trusted. In other words, it becomes a bankable contract. So I think it's time now that when I say business models for investment, can we use the principles of structured finance? And I know many of my finance colleagues will hate me for saying this because structured finance famously caters to failed markets. But there is an opportunity now that unless we use all the tools that we have in our toolbox, we'll miss this one opportunity to try and combine the energy sector or the distribution energy sector, batteries. Right now, that discussion on batteries is still very much in electric vehicles, and that's ground transport and transportation for the most part. There is a life for batteries after the first 12 months, 18 months, depending on how much you've used it. But just now, as we speak, there's at least about 700, I'm being extremely conservative, there's at least 700 buses, maybe more, 400 per company, God knows how many there are. There's at least 150 megawatts of old batteries, old meaning second life batteries, that will be made available next year. They have no market. They can be repurposed. They are being repurposed in a number of places. Thailand has one of the biggest repurposing firms or spaces for repurposing. These batteries have a life at who knows what price, but certainly cheaper than $350 per kilowatt, which is what lithium ion costs today. And they can be used for all kinds of grid applications. So we have this opportunity to combine energy distribution, the power sector, combine that with the thinking of electric vehicles, which is traditionally the transportation sector, and carbon finance, which is traditional. Of course, we're all doing this because of climate change, but that discussion sits in a completely different set of people, often in a different ministry. But really what we're talking about now is if I am able to combine all of this, then the cost of supply of energy services from a single lithium-ion battery comes down to by 60%. But that just means that all of these pieces have to work together, which just means that people like all of you that you have brought to this panel, we will have to get together to try and develop these solutions at scale. What happens if we don't do that? Of course, it's a wasted opportunity, but any wasted opportunity is also lost money. Is a lost opportunity to reduce costs at both ends. So yes, grids will have batteries and power generation companies will be told to keep some backup supply, and distribution companies will be asked to increase the battery, but it will remain in that sector with a single use. But if our charging stations can charge in the daytime cars and in the evening do something else, then these two sectors work. And we're in a situation where we can use this kind of thinking. So I'd say, well, I'm beginning to now think, well, one of the fundamental ways to bring in much more investment is to just increase the use cases. Many more investors will be interested in this asset. It won't just be fixed income investors looking at your power purchase agreement.
Thanks, Mahua. Very insightful answer. Would you or someone else, some other speaker may like to insert maybe the South Asia component over here? How can it, of course, in India, this can work. We are having discussions. How can we kind of replicate it in adjoining in neighbor countries, and how India can probably have a role in that? It's open for anyone.
Anindya?
Yes,
May
yes,
I?
Dr. Tongia, please, please.
So I think the fundamental question is we have to be a little mindful of several shifts occurring both globally, in technology, and regionally. The first question is why isn't there more energy trade and cooperation in South Asia? Because historically, who had surplus? The first shift is we had decades of deficiency in energy, and how you manage that always had more as the answer. And I worry that just because renewables have gotten very cheap, more should not be the answer again. Because a supply side focus is one tool in a portfolio, but we also need efficiency, demand response, all of the above. The second part of this is green has really become the new BAU, business as usual. Solar is dirt cheap. Financiers love it because of the green cash, not because of the green per se. Who's going to put money into new coal plants? It's a struggle. But the larger worry related to that, and I can come back to this later in more detail, is almost all the discussions that we have right now are what people will call VRE, variable renewable energy. Take it when you can. When the sun shines, great. When it doesn't, you need something else, quote unquote. And as Mahua had mentioned, lithium ion is pretty expensive today. Even a 2030 projection by people who are sort of optimistic suggests that the delivered cost, including inverter, including all of the other stuff, is going to be in the order of $100 a kilowatt hour. 61 was the newest Bloomberg number for the packs, but then you have to add a lot more. So by the time you're done, it's going to end up in that range, plus or minus, nobody knows, frankly. So even this has a cost. So storage is nowhere near cost effective in the very short run. Doesn't mean we don't grow it and scale it and learn and improve. But then we have to step back to really one of the elephants in the room, which is hydropower. It's a separate question. Do people consider hydro green? It has huge human and land implications, but it's relatively carbon friendly. I mean, there's a lot of deforestation and one-time distortions, but operationally, it doesn't emit fossil fuel-based CO2. So now hydro is the reason, or one of the reasons, and this is, about the frameworks. It's not about the cooperation aspect only. Europe does more international trade of energy than India does interstate when you normalize. Or at least that was the case a couple of years ago. And you have to ask yourself why. And the fundamental reason is we haven't got good frameworks set up yet, which really recognize how new electricity needs to be as opposed to old electricity. Old electricity was rupees per kilowatt hour, dollars or cents per kilowatt hour, and that's it. And you lock yourself into a 25-year power purchase agreement and you bid it out, maybe if you're trying to be a little competitive, or you pass through the cost. The new world has more competitive structures to it and more uncertainty, because renewables are inherently uncertain. And so countries really need to get their homeworks done of this variability aspect, because otherwise you have this concern that all you're doing is transferring risk across borders, which right now is barely able to be contained within the border. And so these are some of the important issues that don't get solved overnight, because some of the constraints are domestic. So now if you think that a larger pool solves some of these problems, I think that's a bit far-fetched. You're muted.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for that insight, Dr. Tongia. I'll now come to Mr. Rajesh Mediratta, and I want to ask you that we are curious to know how power exchanges can help provide a credible mechanism for wider renewable energy adoption in South Asia. and how can it help make RE investments in the region more viable?
Yeah, thanks, Anindya. Thanks for this opportunity to talk to you and my friends across the region. See, we started with day-ahead market. So I'll talk about market, that how it has helped in India, the current where we are operating. And we started with day-ahead market and limited forward markets in 2008. And so initially it was all hourly, then we went to 15 minutes. And again, the purpose was that we should provide something more granular to the market, and that we saw was very useful. Then also we were trading on intraday basis, and that was up to 3 hours before. And that was also very helpful to generally the conventional plant and distribution companies, utilities. Only thing is, when we started looking at more deployment of renewables in last 3-4 years, then there was a need felt to have something which is more closer to real time. We should be able to provide a platform where people should be able to do trade. And that's what we have done from June onwards. We have introduced a real-time market, which is 1 hour before market. So that is basically to take care of intermittency of renewables, and that we are finding it very, very useful, because the utilities are using it a lot, and that has become very liquid. So currently we trade about 15 to 20% of total trade. What we used to do in day, now it goes through real-time market. So that has been something due because of renewables, and that we have introduced. On the green side, we had one market there, which we have, we call it REC, Renewable Energy Certificate Market. There we separate green attribute from the green sources, and then the green attribute is sold separately in the REC market. So it doesn't relate to real-time power flows, but when some power has flown from a green source, then it gets REC. That is green attribute for 1 megawatt of our green generation, and that can be sold over a period of 2 to 3 years. And so there is a total disconnect we had done, in the sense that you don't need to sell green attribute at the same time when you are selling power. So these, so this was the only market based framework. Of course, there is a scope for doing PPA. So people used to do PPA, which is for 25 years. Now, as Rahul also said, that this 25-year PPA doesn't make sense now. And we have to provide a platform where there's a need to have a system where people should be able to buy when they really need it, but they can't make a promise to keep buying from any source for 25 years, because the whole thing is becoming very volatile. The markets are volatile, the frameworks are volatile, and the new technologies keep on coming. What we see in case of renewable downward slope in the prices, actually that is in some way it plays negative to doing a really long-term PPA. So because of this, we have now introduced a green market, which is for buying and selling of green power directly from source to buyer. So earlier there used to be only method of doing a PPA, but now somebody can buy it in an intraday basis. They can buy in a day-ahead basis. It can buy up to a week basis currently. But of course, we will provide a platform as soon as our issue of long-term, the longer duration future forwards. If that when the issue will be resolved, then we would be also able to provide a platform for doing contracts which are for a year. So these are basically market-based approach to getting this trading of renewables, and we hope that that will be helpful for the market, and that is will be very handy to renewable generator and also distribution utility. Because another issue which we have faced, we are seeing that this utilities face, is that when they have done a contract from say solar or wind, and when they want to actually in the real time basis, they see that not that all the time they require that kind of generation, because they have to manage their conventional power plants also, and that becomes very difficult for them during at least during the daytime when there's a lot of solar, and they have to back down their coal-based plants. And then today we don't have that kind of flexibility in our coal-based plants, so that they would like to sell that green power into the market, and for that this green market is very, very helpful. So these two new introductions which we have done in last 3 months has really helped a lot to the market. Now, whether this is the right way to go forward in terms of investment, so that really is a challenge, as I see that, because financing becomes difficult when you don't have a contract or you don't have a visibility of prices. And price visibility for market beyond 5 years is something very difficult, given that you are really not aware that how the battery prices are going to come down, how the demand is going to emerge because of efficiency and the rooftop solar market, how that is going to emerge. So the markets are good. Only that we need to still find out the challenge that how the financing can be done for these projects. Now, when you broaden the scope from a country to region, then of course that gives you a lot of comfort in the sense that we all know that cross-border trades are helpful to everyone, in the sense that it gives you advantage of handling intermittency, because we, particularly in South Asia, we have Nepal, Bhutan, with huge potential of more than 50,000 megawatt, and which can be very helpful in balancing the whole system. So the storage versus hydro, that of course will decide that which way the whole markets can emerge. Another area that there is a large balancing is possible when you have a region connected, interconnected, and you can make use of complementaries across the region, and solar versus hydro versus wind. So all that can play out very well in a broader area. So this is what we see, that the regional markets can help a lot in the sense to manage the system, to give balancing loads. It can create comfort for the utility. It can create comfort for the system operators and everyone. So important thing is now how to go forward. I feel that interconnections we should be rather more generous in putting this interconnections as infrastructure, because this still involves a very small part of the whole cost of or the whole benefit or opportunity what we get from the markets. And as we understand that power is something which is not storable, so for that reason you will see that when we started this market of intraday, we find that the utility which never thought that they will be taking power, they are now taking power. In real-time markets, people keep on exchanging. It's not one side, it's always two sides. And we see in case of our cross-border countries also that Bangladesh is supposed to be a deficit market, but we see that in winter they also have sufficient generation to sell, but they don't have any platform or any mechanism to sell that surplus. So these surpluses and deficits are something which are very, very real time, and for that we need to have a strong interconnections. That's one. We also should create a better enabling market framework. And we see that in case of markets, there are many ways by which we can make it attractive. Even the renewables can be made attractive by creating ancillary markets, which are market based. So that can help build right capacities. Maybe storage can become viable, maybe hydro, which seems to be costlier today, but that can also become viable with ancillary markets in place. So maybe when we create markets and across region, if we can create a mechanism by which we should be able to exchange the carbon attribute or green attribute of the sources. Maybe not in the near future, but maybe after some time. That can be useful. Can we also think of having RPO or the obligation, renewable power obligation, which can be recognized in other countries? Or we can allow the green attributes on export of power, which can be tradable within the country. So whatever we have done in case of India, probably that can also be explored in other countries. Like REC is something which create a very convenient way of transferring the carbon credits. Exactly, it's not similar to carbon credit, but it's carbon. It's equivalent to carbon credit for renewable energy. So all those possibilities there. Yeah.
So Mr. Mediratta, you're saying whatever mechanisms India has created for itself, maybe the time is ripe to replicate it and handhold other countries in doing that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So there are a lot of things.
Yeah.
See, one is that we provided a lot of bouquet of now currently we have good set of market products. And then it gives a lot of play to every entity, and they can make use of these products suitable to them.
Okay.
And India,
Thank you, sir. Yeah. Yes, please.
Sorry,
yes, please.
I just want to I want to put in one other comment. I really like what Rajeshji said. We deepen the market, and I think part of our financing discussions right now lie in just different quarters, and they lie a little bit scattered in different quarters. So what I mean by that is, you have the IEX here saying there are just so many products out there. In the lending business, at least in India, we need to deepen our debt market. We don't have enough of differentiated debt products. So if we did have, for example, in a lot of places, construction finance comes at very different terms from money for when your plant is operational. We don't have a refinancing market that's deep enough. We have lots of sales going on. It's also a little bit difficult to understand, some of the sales, whether they're strategic and banking on an exit later. But if we had a refinancing market, it would be an intermediary step to deal with the current mismatch. A 25-year PPA, there are lots of people saying 25-year PPA is just probably too long. It doesn't serve a lot of places. Discoms don't like it. They get stuck in it. You don't know where on the cost curve you sit. You can't refinance it. You can't stay with the market. Basically, you get locked in. Well, on the other side, if you don't have a 25-year PPA, if you don't have a long-term PPA, you don't get money. The thing is, the current money that's available is 7-year money or 10-year money, maximum 10-year money. So 4 or 5 years ago, we were saying we need 25-year money. Well, yes, but then our technology is moving. So instead of that, I think our market needs to get a little bit just to the next level of sophistication. Our money markets just need to have many more products, regulated of course, but regulated products that will allow a potential developer a bouquet of options, including, 80% is finance, 20% is speculative. The speculative portion, you look at, you say, I'm going to sell this in the exchange. The exchange is a reliable format. And if the exchange were connected to the South Asian pool, if they in fact were an interconnected pool, it would deepen the market almost immediately.
That's a very relevant point, Mahua. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Both
Mahua said
Mahua and
very
Mr.
relevant
Nandita.
point. Yeah, actually that can really help because you can have a portfolio of 70-30 or 80-20 or 60-40 as you go along, and that comfort will come over a period of time. That you can buy more on the market and less on the long-term PPA.
Yeah, we're still stuck in this 30-70 fix.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and then so I think that can make RE investments in the region more viable as well and attract more investors as well when there is a place to sell. Okay, so I want to come back now to Dr. Vijay Tunga here, because we've spoken about financing options, investment, mechanisms, and I want to ask him how interested multilateral banks such as the ADB would be in investing in hydropower projects in South Asia meant for cross-border supply. I mean, are there any plans to use, say, the Future Carbon Fund and any such facilities to bring costs down for cross-border power trade projects?
Yeah, Anindya, thank you very much for that very relevant question. Probably rather than just focusing only on hydro, I must say that we are very much into financing in all sorts of renewable energy, as you know. And hydropower, yes, for sure. Yes, obviously there are concerns relating to funding hydropower, as some of our colleagues just said. But still, hydropower is an important contributor to climate mitigation. All of us know. And so, as you probably are aware, in Bhutan we have recently, financed two cross-border projects, Darachu and Nikaju. And Nikaju is still under construction. Darachu commissioned some time ago. And in fact, we are looking at a very big hydropower plant in Nepal, which will eventually push power across the border to India. And Dudkoshi, that's 660 megawatt hydropower plant. Obviously, we have to very carefully look at the safeguard issues, and it's a very complex project. And also not only that, but also financing. I mean, for ADB in a country like Nepal, a 660 megawatt hydropower plant is a lot of money in the country program. We don't have that much of money, so we have to find co-financing. That itself is a challenge, and in that, we have been able to talk to most of the bilaterals, multilaterals like EIB and so on. Also, our own private sector, division. As you know, ADB has a sovereign window and a non-sovereign window, and non-sovereign window is typically commercial financing. But when we have a short of financing, we need to talk to all these, and we are talking about a $2 billion investment in Dudkoshi. And so we are very much interested, and particularly clean energy and hydropower for sure. And along with it, whatever transmission evacuation facilities which we are looking at, also we will be funding. And funding sources are there. And we are trying hard to get all types of financing. And whenever there is climate financing, naturally we'll try to get them as much as possible to sweeten the deals. Because the lending rates, lending terms may not be as attractive when it comes to some of the bilaterals or even commercial financing like our own private sector financing. So to sweeten it, probably we need climate financing. So we'll try to make use of whatever possible avenues to get such financing too. So all in all, in summary, what I should say is that multilaterals like ADB are very much into financing clean energy, large-scale clean energy, including hydropower. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vijay Tunga. At this point in time, I'll invite Dr. Tongia, Dr. Ghosh, and Dr. Day to probably answer this question. and any of you can answer this, or all of you can answer this. What policy enablers are needed for trading green energy in the region? We have spoken about so many investments, instruments, technologies. Any thoughts on policy enablers, please?
Who goes first? Should I start? Yeah. Okay. I'll in my comment, I'll also, add some things that I probably is relevant for the earlier questions also. See, first thing that one needs to understand from this trade in the South Asia region, and I'm saying this from the point of view that IRADE has conducted 3 studies, long-term modeling-based studies for analyzing electricity trade in South Asia, and 2 of the studies were bilateral trade studies between India and Bangladesh, and India and Nepal, and the 3rd study was multilateral trade between the BBIN regions. Now, what I want to tell you is that the trade in South Asia region, in the BBIN region especially, as earlier speakers have said, India is very central to this trade, and India is the 3rd largest electricity producer in the world, and that makes it like a very large country in this trade. So generally, and anybody who works in trade theories would say that whenever there is a large country and small countries trading, what the small countries don't matter so much. What the large country does, the policy changes that it makes, has an impact on the trade. So same is the case for this trade in South Asia. India matters most, and India matters significantly. That is the first thing. Second thing is that when we did our trade study, the 2 bilateral trade study, what we found is that when India trades with Bangladesh, it is not the green energy that is significant. See, what happens is when you trade, you don't trade because you have a lot of power to sell, or excess power to sell, or the other country has excess power to sell, or just because you want to enter into trade. Trade happens when both countries benefit mutually. So trade happens at a price that benefits both the countries. So when India trades with Bangladesh, and economically, the power that India produces from its coal power plants is the most cheapest option for Bangladesh, given any of its technologies that it has in its country. And therefore, Bangladesh imports as much as power possible from India. In our trade study, we had assumed 15% and 30% as the upper bound, because Bangladesh had some energy security considerations also. And we found that Bangladesh is willing to absorb as much as power it can from India, which basically means that India's coal-based power, right now India has a lot of underutilized coal capacities, and that is leading to a very cheap power for Bangladesh. So that is the scope for trade between India and Bangladesh right now. And Bangladesh is a growing economy. It's always going to be an importer, mostly. Now, but when India trades with Nepal, that's not the case. India's trade with Nepal is very is 2-dimensional. What we found is that initially Nepal, being a little underdeveloped country, it doesn't have the resources to build its hydro capacity, and India and Nepal mainly imports from India. But later on, with trade, Nepal earns a lot of money, and it builds its hydro capacity, and in future it really starts exporting to India in a big way. Now, why does it export to India? Why is its power cheaper to India? That is because of India's push for renewables into its grid. What we find is that the balancing requirement for renewables in India drives the electricity market for Nepal's hydro, and similarly for Bhutan. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that it is not green energy that is driving trade, it is trade that is driving green energy here. And that is a very important distinction to make. And when even in the multilateral context, this holds. So when multilateral context, India is central to this trade, and India basically gives the the trading corridor between Bangladesh and Nepal and Bhutan. So Nepal and Bhutan can sell its hydro to Bangladesh also, and to India also. So even there, both Bangladesh and India are net importers, and Nepal and Bhutan are exporters of hydro. What is important in our study that we found out is that because of trade, Nepal could actually exploit 34 gigawatt of its 43 gigawatt capacity, whereas now, given the in the no trade situation, Nepal could exploit only at the most 9 gigawatt by 2045. That's a huge capacity development that trade can help make. So, the thing that I'm trying to say is that in India is pushing for its NDCs. India is pushing for solar and wind, is renewable capacity, renewable energy into the grid. What is required to do to push the green energy into the grid is developing balancing markets. That is day-ahead balancing market and hourly balancing market. And this has to be developed in India. And once that is developed in India, it will help absorption of renewables. And once that happens, it has to merely let the players from Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh to participate in this market. That is exactly what is required for this trading market to develop. And once that develops, these hydro capacities in Nepal and Bhutan will develop, and a lot of greening and efficiency will happen. What we also found is that because of trade, India's reliance on coal goes down and Bangladesh's reliance on gas goes down. So that's a very important result. It's both ways. Maybe the India's green push is driving its requirement for trade, and trade is helping the green push. So both way it happens. So primarily what is required to be done is for India to develop its power markets, its balancing markets, and then make those enabling legislations to let the the players from the neighboring country to also participate in these markets. Now, apart from that, when we were doing this study, when we started in 2014, I have to tell that what is missing here is a political confidence. The political confidence in 2014 was very low. And that was the time when we started our studies. And by the time we ended in 2018, we could convince a lot of policymakers in this region through our modeling based studies, through a very open, publicly accessible results and assumptions and analysis to various stakeholders in Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh, that each of them stands to economically gain through lower electricity prices if they go for trade. And that was a very good game changer, I would say. And right now we are in a situation where all the countries have opened up. There are trade corridors and trade infrastructure that are being put up, and we're quite optimistic that women trade should take up. And once trade takes up, I think all these countries they will be a lot more confident about this trade. Right now, they're taking baby steps. The confidence is little less, and political naysayers in the surrounding countries and India have reduced. The yes have gone up in recent years, and that confidence has to be built through doing these things. That's what I want to say. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh, for that very insightful, detailed response. Okay, so now I think it's time for an audience poll. Can we please beam the question on the screen? And then we'll go into an audience Q&A session. We have a couple of questions here, and I'll add some more maybe. So everybody please vote. Yeah. This is very interesting. All right. We have closed results on the poll. Okay, so let's go into audience question and answers. So we have a question from Aditi Mukund, and she asks, when it comes to sustainable finance, how do we ensure that it is more socially inclusive?
Anindya, is it targeted to anybody, or are you requesting anyone to respond?
So anybody can respond to this, please. Sorry, I didn't make that clarification.
I can take a stab at it, Anindya.
Please.
Thank you. Aditi, I don't know if I'll be able to answer the question completely, but I'd say that, you know, sustainable finance is not some special product. It's, after all, at the end of the day, money that's being invested in certain types of things, usually green and of sustainable variety, but that money is still looking for returns. And without that returns, that money will not be reinvested and we won't have scale. The issue around inclusivity holds as much for any sort of money, whether it's money for green sort of assets or sustainable assets or anything else. So I think the more relevant thing would be that, well, we all want inclusivity. That's the kind of growth we want. Now, what do we need in order to get there? Of course, you know, policies that promote that is one thing. But from a micro level, when an investor makes a decision to put money into a certain project, there is a standard set of risk assessment criteria. Unfortunately or unfortunately, over the years, we have not changed the way we think about this risk assessment. So when I'm putting money into a traditional solar plant that is selling to the grid or anybody else, to a single buyer for a long term, there's only one thing to diligence. And over the years, you found that you're looking at the same sort of criteria. Now, on the other hand, if I'm going to be putting money into a solar project that is selling power to 5,000 villages or 100 villages, the risk assessment framework is very, very different. And often what happens to us, we end up, and it's, of course, it's a collective failure. The risk assessment criteria will tell you, oh my God, how am I going to get my money back from 50 villages? Who's going to go and collect this? Is it going to come to me in cash, or is it going to come to me via mobile service provider? And then, you just go down a rabbit hole of questions. But the fact is, if we had, so how do you address that? A traditional banker will not want to touch those sort of projects. A traditional investor will not get there until the bank comes in or somebody provides a bit of lending. So our products need to come up to speed a little bit more. We would need, and those sorts of projects, when I say 50 villages, those are the kind of things that you're saying are much more inclusive. Lighting that's going into homes that's beyond 3 or 4 lights. It's lighting for commercial purposes as well. So a lot of these so-called sort of more inclusive projects tend to have risk criteria that by traditional finance means looks a little worrying. And then, everybody gets a little nervous, like, what do I do with this? So the issue is not that how does one make sustainable finance more inclusive. I would say the issue is what other products can sustainable finance produce out in the market in order to assess the risk of these slightly more inclusive projects a bit better.
So if I could, Anindya.
Yes, please go ahead.
I would extend Mahua's argument and bring it to a fundamental question, which is, do we see a trade-off between inclusive and green or not? Because if we step back and say, I want to give access, I want to give affordability, I want to give quality, that's another phrase that hasn't been talked of nearly enough when we talk of all these solutions. Quality brings a cost. And the fundamental challenge isn't the green, it's the other stuff on the inclusivity. Because even if I gave coal-based power to all the people who don't have electricity, and I gave them a lifeline amount of electricity, the carbon emissions are noise. I'm sorry. We're getting too hung up on green. Now, obviously, we'd like inclusivity to be as green as possible, or we'd like green to be as inclusive as possible. There's no sort of debate. But some of the other things often get muddled around is one of my strong concerns. One of the fundamental challenges for inclusivity is that it doesn't matter whether you're centralized, decentralized, grid, standalone, microgrid, brown or green. The cost of that energy to a marginal consumer, who is often rural, is much higher than the average. If you use very little, and I do a microgrid, or I extend the grid, they're all going to cost double, triple, or more of your traditional, what your larger consumers in the traditional grid enjoy in urban areas. And so the fundamental question is, coming back to the risk lens that Mahua sort of flagged, is what are your models to handle that? And then you need to have overlays that reflect green or sustainability, because otherwise you're going to put the the cart before the horse.
Thank you, Dr. Togia, for that. I think we've...
Okay, go
yes,
ahead.
Please. Yes, please.
Yeah, just to chip in that I mean, when it comes to financing like ADB financing or other multilateral banks also, I mean, this is one of the indicators we have when it comes to arranging financing. Gender and inclusivity in our lending, and that's one of the markers we have. And always the board members, the reviewers always look at how much inclusive our lending is going to be. So we always look at that as a priority, not just of course renewable energy, the green part of it is one thing, but inclusive investment is another. So we have a whole list of things which we check before we proceed. So in that sense, with that, we may be able to increase our lending more into green and inclusive projects. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so are green and inclusive exclusive, or like wherever we are in the world, we are trying to bring them together? Because inherently, I think when people say green or talk of green, they assume inclusive. And so I was just wondering, are they very far away, the inclusive and the green? Because I think Dr. Togia confused my concepts or my understanding of that. Anybody, please?
As far as we are concerned, they can exist together and they can complement each other. Yes.
In India, I would agree with Priyanta. I mean, it's like saying, some years ago when you asked a private company, what does sustainability mean to you? And they would say transparency. And to me, it would be, no, but you're expected to be transparent regardless. So I think we're, green and inclusive, well, of course. I mean, nobody wants a society where you're not able to involve people in the marketplace.
No, but I would just push back a little bit by saying,
yes, please.
If I look at, for example, in India, not to lose the sight of the regional aspect, the cheapest green is actually larger scale. Rooftop based is more expensive. And if you now say that I must be decentralized or standalone, then your storage costs are killer. Solar cells have fallen dirt cheap. Batteries are nowhere near there. And this quality issue is very key for rural inclusivity. I view inclusivity as also being quality. We shouldn't make it cheap in the name of the poor and give lousy service. And so to me, that lens is where there's a small difference. So it is possible to increase inclusivity without being green or vice versa. Now, obviously, ideally, they should align, but it's not automatic, is my sort of thought.
No, that's a very interesting perspective. Okay, I think in the interest of time, we will move to our next topic, our next discussion. And I would come to Dr. Prabir Dey over here. Dr. Dey, could you give us an example maybe of what other regions or any other region in the world has done right in promoting electricity cooperation and trade? And if there's something South Asia or India can learn from that experience.
Thank you very much, Anindya. Look, I have been closely following South Asia and I work on ASEAN. So I won't be able to tell you what's happening in Latin America or maybe in other parts of Africa or Europe. But for ASEAN, certainly, a couple of things they have done. But progress on the ground is very limited. If you minutely look at what ASEAN has done, Southeast Asian countries, the 10 countries, mostly usual standard, the bilateral arrangements like surplus power, hydropower from Laopedia to Thailand, Thailand to Vietnam, Laopedia to Vietnam, etc., etc. There are some success stories on Southeast Asian countries. So far, their regional program is done. There are some good attempts. I follow up on the institutional part, the governance part. On Spain, South Asian countries, very similar story. There are surplus region, deficit region. 10 countries having 10 different institutions, different laws, exchange of power. They feel this important, but so far, regional energy market is concerned, progress is very limited. So common regional market, common power market is ASEAN, certainly in relative terms, much ahead of what we are doing in South Asia or in BIMSTEC or DDIN, certainly. They have, for example, they have agreed upon the regional framework when you do the common power exchange, grid interconnectivity. Sending the hydroelectricity not only from to Thailand, which is a bilateral arrangement, also to going beyond to Malaysia or Singapore like that. But 10 countries, one common formula, getting it ratified, again implementing, strengthening the regional institutions, and coming up with the supra regional arrangements. All these haven't taken place yet. Southeast Asia is still fragmented. Still go hand in hand, of course, when you are doing in the trade, transportation, those things. So energy, very much part of one of the priority areas, but going from the usual priority to a more kind of a very need-based is yet to see you getting a proper step. That's just very general. But there are some bilateral development happen, and there are good lessons for us, which I'll come back to what we're doing in South Asia and with what we can draw from there for our area. But South Asia, ASEAN countries, they have done also apart from the common grid market, that ASEAN gas energy linkages. In some part of Southeast Asia, they have the gas surplus gas fields. Malaysia, Brunei, part of Indonesia, part of Philippines. They would like to bring it in a common gas grid, the project. But there are archipelagos, there are islands, there are difficult terrains. Putting all together is still difficult. So what it tells ASEAN in nutshell, those who are geographically interconnected, 7 of them, there is a huge attempt to make it that. And hopefully, it will be coming through. So there is a plan for ASEAN countries to reach an ASEAN economic community by 2025, of which energy linkages, which will be up and running. This is also it is one of the milestones. There are good success stories for ASEAN. ADB gentleman, he can, the Southeast Asian, he can substantiate, he can comment on more. There is a funding, special arrangements for power funding for ASEAN markets. There are private sectors who source interest. But there are issues which I look at the literature on the pricing, on some of the sort of a cross subsidy that Laopedia, Cambodia, Vietnam, Myanmar, and to some extent Thailand, they seek. Producing region, receiving region, if there is a huge gap, even in the power. So deficit, the exporting just hydropower excess. Of course, the Laopedia, they have been demanding. There are source of concerns. Please look at us because there are floods from hydroelectricity, producing regions. So there are issues, So this is in short what ASEAN is doing. Lastly, that 2025 ASEAN Economic Community, smart gas grid, smart power exchange, all these are very much part of that programs, and there are small things are happening. Region specific, but nationally, there are progress, good success stories. Singapore, for example, good success stories for ASEAN, which is a best practice for lessons for South Asia. Coordination. there is, the institutions, the expert group, the 10 countries there, the arrangement of the meeting, follow-up through the ASEAN Secretariat, all these are happening, relatively speaking, much better organized manner than what we have there. Let's come to South Asia. Many of you, they have been discussing, but SAARC, the 2014, that was the last, we have a regional agreement, SAARC Power Exchange, SAARC Energy Market, but no progress. And you know very well, 8 countries, if they don't go along, if there is no peace, there are conflicts anywhere, in any form, regional cooperation doesn't value anyone. In the post-COVID today, when the demand of, or type of the requirement of regional trade has changed. So in this type, I'm not very optimistic what is going to happen in South SAARC kind of arrangement. In Bangladesh, India, and I think Sri Lanka, they 3 ratified SAARC Energy Cooperation Agreement 24. Ratified. Ratification means you have come long way negotiating, accepting, going to parliament, getting it ratified, but not yet, implemented because other countries they haven't done. So far, SAARC is an attempt to do a regional energy market. Progress is absolutely, we haven't seen much there. But what is promising is, from my point of view, the regional cooperations, to answer to you, drawing lessons from ASEAN is the BIMSTEC or in the BBIN. BBIN is a kind of an open region. There is an arranged program going on. Discussion is happening with Bhutan, India, Bangladesh, trilateral, Nepal, Bangladesh, India trilateral. And there are NTPC, PWC, Power Grid Corporation. There are some arrangements of MOUs, and hopefully something will emerge. But when, I really do not know. But for BIMSTEC and BBIN, BIMSTEC, if you come, then there is an power grid exchange agreement signed, but yet to be implemented. Now, if you come to India and ASEAN, by drawing lessons what ASEAN has been doing, our grids are not connected. And the Ministry of Power, Ministry of Non-Renewable, the view is that let's do the cooperation with ASEAN, not in a hard energy sector, means the traditional one. Let's concentrate more into the green energy. What's the top theme of your discussion? So I had very detailed consultation for our own projects with the Ministry of Power and Ministry of Non-Renewable Energy. They are more important. Since this is in a closed discussion, I can share this fact that more they are interested for energy capacity building rather than market-driven energy trade. So you can see that even though India, Bangladesh, India, Bhutan, India, Nepal, their power grids are interconnected, but when you come to Southeast Asia, looking at Southeast Asia's own initiative to reach a common energy market by 2025, isn't it that India is one of the largest trade partners of Southeast ASEAN? They should also look at the coupling of India's grid with Southeast Asia. That's not happening, right? Our grids, India's grid is with Southeast Asia is not yet connected, except a small portion which I was told 3 megawatt can exchange. That's because, just to illuminate one border town in the Myanmar. So what I suggest from looking at just quickly, I will conclude in half a minute that there are good lessons from ASEAN, and we may look at those. Green energy, this is the topic which fits very much with the government of India's initiative. They would like to have a more cooperation, but anything you do cross-border, it needs a very strong political push as well as institutional support. Where SAARC, South Asia, BIMSTEC, BBIN, you have energy cooperation team, for example, headed by hydropower Bhutan, coal-based thermal power by India, Bangladesh by something or else like that. So you need a political push plus very strong institutional connect. That's what ASEAN is doing, which is with the 10 countries. Even if the progress for gas, or other energy connectivity is limited, relatively speaking, in ASEAN, in Southeast Asia, compared to other parts of the world. But if you look at their institutional programs, meeting, follow-up, helping countries to studies and all, those are very much up and running. For South Asia, this is, I think, what I feel is purely personal view. ADB, AREA, Asia Foundation, many others are doing studies, I know, but regional study, regional push, both in SAARC, BIMSTEC, looking at ASEAN and BBIN, I don't find anything. Sorry, I might sound a little bit, unusual in the today's discussion, but as I said, I'm not a pure energy expert that you see here, but my experience is more in the regional cooperation, and I hope you will find it useful. Thank you.
No, Dr. Dey, it was actually very insightful, whatever you said, a very kind of umbrella bird's eye view on maybe where we lack. And ASEAN is a good example to compare with, probably is what you said. So now with whatever you've said about, India or South Asia, Asian groupings lacking institutional, support, political, economic support, I want to kind of take this whole argument, this whole view forward and ask if there are any ideas on if regional energy trade could be the first step towards one sun, one world, one grid initiative. Like how does the lack of all these support mechanisms and the OSOVOG initiative, which has been announced, kind of, tie up? How does one propel the other? Prabir Dey, Dr. Dey, you could start, or anyone could answer this question.
I would suggest that today's time we have you can have a very simple linear formula when you call for one kind of an energy system from the world. There are gaps in income. There are regional disparity is very wide. So regional disparity, I mean in economic stuff. So and also the resources. So when you come to our part of the world, in South Asia and Southeast Asia, Indian Ocean, there are of course, most important, but going to cross borders, where is the gap? And there are ADB, for example, or Asia Foundation, any other one, they have identified that the gap is in the cross border, because if you would like to take the power from one country to another country in the gap, has it been insured? Has it been properly supported by both the countries in case of risks, in case of any kind of damages, in case of disaster? So those things we have not yet looked at that. So when you talk about a regional framework of power energy, your other economics, energy economics, or other arrangements are very important. But to me, we should look at more precisely on cross-border elements, which is in this part of the world is missing. And I would suggest that let's look at the eastern part where the sun rises. Distant means India, distant sites, and there are several good examples. And even if we do small arrangements and one small between bilateral development between India and Myanmar, even then Myanmar is well connected, relatively speaking, again with the rest of the Southeast Asian countries. So only India has to do strengthen interlinkages with the Myanmar. So that small effort might bring India with the Southeast Asia, at least the 10 plus 1, 11 countries, one world, what you are talking about, a common, one sun, one energy market like that. Yeah. Thank you.
This question is open to yes.
Yeah,
please.
I would like to add something. This is again based on the studies that we had done, but IRADE, my organization, has been implementing the SARI project for SARI EI project in the South Asia region from 2014 onwards, and this we are doing for the USAID. And I'm talking, what I'm trying to say is from the things that we did for the project. See, cross-border electricity trade requires institutions, definitely. And when we did this study, we looked at the various cross-border trade studies, cross-border trade examples that are across the world, in the African, South Latin American, European, the Myanmar's context also. And we came out with various recommendations about institutions, that is trading platforms, conflict solving platforms, all these mechanisms, they have to be built to get the South Asia trade going. And they are not currently there, but they can be built. What I earlier also said is that what the South Asian countries lack right now is the political confidence of being able to handle cross-border electricity trade. There were a lot of doubts initially. Those doubts have come down, but the confidence is lacking. So they're taking baby steps. And once that confidence comes, so I think here, what institutions like Asia Foundation and other research institutions and people in the climate change field can help these governments is to overcome this lack of confidence. How to go about successfully implementing the cross-border electricity trade so that the interests of no country is harmed and no country thinks that they're being taken for a ride. That is the I would say that insecurity in the minds of the political governments that they have partially overcome. But I think these institutions can handhold these countries to, even the Indian government, to go. Once that is done, then it will be very easy for India to link up with ASEAN and the Mekong region as well, or even the One Sun One Grid. Right now, what is lacking is, because see, electricity is the infrastructure sector, and no country would what goes on into the policymakers' mind is that, what if the other country switches off their grid and politically blackmails me? So we have to talk in that terms, that no country would want to do that, and the institutional arrangements that has to be in place to see that that doesn't happen. Once that confidence is there, then there is no reason why these countries will not even participate in ASEAN or One Sun One Grid. Now, traditionally, trade happens between countries, and it happens because each country gains out of trade. How? By buying a commodity that will be more costly to produce domestically, but cheaper to produce from outside. So similarly, electricity, if it is cheaper from outside, people will buy. But why was electricity trade not happening earlier? Because you can't transport electricity in ships. So you need borders, you need land, you need interconnectors. Now, world over, in all electricity markets, what they have shown is that by pooling these electricity markets, by preparing electricity markets, the benefit is to the grid. It increases grid efficiency, it increases grid stability, it reduces domestic investments required for managing the grid. These are well established benefits, and once all the countries are linked, their grids are linked, then One Sun One Grid is just just a step away. I mean, that what doesn't require a political push for that. So what I'm trying to say is, for India, especially for India, because India is the driving force here. It is getting over that insecurity. It's getting over that political doubts about this thing. Once that is done, then other things are going to be smooth. And because that is there, we are seeing baby steps, not huge progress. We are thinking that God knows how much time it will take for them to build that corridor. But that is where I think so a lot of effort should be made to get these governments past that mindset.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. Yeah, Dr. Vijay Tunga was trying to say something, I think.
Yeah, just to let you know, when it comes to the institutional framework, I know the established frameworks like SAARC, BIMSTEC, and so on, they're there. But of course, one thing during my experience, what I have found is that most of these multilateral frameworks are less effective as against bilateral, negotiations. That has been the case right throughout in South Asia. But one thing we have found, of course, I am not trying to promote our own framework, but you may have heard of this SASAC. South Asia Sub-Regional Economic Cooperation, which of which the secretariat is ADB. ADB basically created it, and it's a framework which the countries get together and drive. And in fact, as you know, we have a very effective SASEC power trading working group, and mostly, I mean, virtually led by India. We usually have those meetings in Delhi. And that's a forum where we come together, all these countries come together and discuss any issues, including things like, this power trade guidelines which India issued, and some of the changes made simply because we discussed these things in this particular forum. And so that may not be as formal as SAARC or BIMSTEC, but SASEC has been pretty useful for us, at least, to push across the investments in cross-border trade. For instance, the investments between Nepal and India, which we are talking about, we are trying to talk about under this particular framework. And also India-Bangladesh happened because of SASEC. And we are now looking at, in fact, as you may not know, probably, Myanmar is part of SASEC now. And we are looking at possible increasing cooperation between India and Myanmar through this framework. So it has been quite effective, as not as formalized as SAARC or BIMSTEC, but I think it's a quite a good arrangement which we can make use of to strengthen this cooperation. As Prabhu quite rightly said, issue is how to overcome this fear at the political level, undermining one or the other. And that fear can go away only if you sit together and discuss these things at an equal footing. And that opportunity, if you can provide under any of this framework, I think things will work. And also one thing what I have to tell you is that, of course, South Asia is not as lacking in regional cooperation as one would see. If you look at grid-to-grid interconnections, if you look at in the world, and South Asia has been, for instance, India, Bangladesh, it's a grid-to-grid interconnection, and you don't see that in very many places. Actually, if you look at cooperation, you see a power plant sitting in, let's say, Laos, and providing a dedicated line to Thailand, and electricity being transported across the border for sure. But of course, for all practical purposes, electrically, it is a single system. That is Thailand. Thailand basically putting up a power plant somewhere else. It's not really cross-border per se, if you really look at it, unless that really see or think in this. Sri Lanka interconnection for us. And so this is just something in the positive light. Thank you.
If I may also kind of add a point to this, Anindya.
Yes, please.
Okay, so I think when we are kind of developing the kind of green power in the context of regional cooperation, I think thinking regional cooperation only limiting to cross-border trade is probably not the best way to kind of think about this. And also when we talk about the context of our past experience in kind of establishing cross-border and all the history which we heard from our colleagues, the clean energy development is happening very fast. You know how much megawatt we are adding like every hour in India. So if we were to kind of depend on this development for based on like we will have some interconnection with somebody else, it would not have happened that way. So I think what I'm saying that definitely the cross-border trade will help in each of the countries to develop some of the green resources. But the overall development of the green resources does not just depend on cross-border trade. And that is where a lot of regional cooperation, and I know ADB and others are also kind of looking at it. It's kind of helping countries each other on other elements which can drive investments. Whether you look into sharing the policy and regulatory frameworks. So if India is able to do rooftop solar, why can't other countries do that? Why can't the other countries have same level of human resources available? Or if India is kind of doing a kind of a national training programs, why can't the same training be offered to other countries and have the same type of kind of a skilled manpower available in those countries? So there are a number of pieces which can add to kind of overall green power development. And I see that the cross-border will be one of that element. And knowing that the cross-border engagement is so slow and takes time, I think the conversation should continue in parallel to the other regional cooperation efforts. So that is one side of it. The second is the business case, the way countries are thinking about cross-border trade. And I'm just kind of pointing to a very specific example of Nepal, thinking about supplying hydropower to India with the consideration that India is shortage of power. This is like 15 years back. Now the context has changed significantly. India is not short of power, but also the cost of power in India to produce new solar is much, much cheaper to compared to what it can get from Nepal. So in that context, there will always be a chicken and egg situation. Okay, I can't develop my hydro resource because there's no buyer at the end of it. And the buyer will not be ready to buy it unless they know that what they're getting. And now with the competition between the technology, the solar, where I know what is the price today and I will get it in next 6 months, versus what is the price today and what I may get in 5 years, 7 years, I don't know, when the infrastructure gets developed, when the projects are established, it is always going to be a challenge. And that is where the whole idea of that thing what Mahua mentioned is like the business model for Nepal to think about supplying power to India through hydro resource has to change completely. And they have to really think through how this hydro resource will play a role in the region, providing a different type of service rather than just kind of serving the general electricity need. And in that context, the markets which Rajesh has mentioned will play an important role. So I think the whole idea of this regional cooperation limiting to cross-border trade will not be sufficient for us to drive action on the green power. Over.
Thank you, Anurag. Thanks for making that point. And that's where I want to actually ask how, say, something like the International Solar Alliance can play a role in fostering more green energy development in the region. I mean, like Dr. Ghosh said, that, you know, we are overcoming our insecurities and taking baby steps, but our announcements are like global level, whether it's OSOVOG or whether it's the ISA. So anybody would like to answer this question, please? The role of ISA in green power development in the region?
If I chip in, Anindya, sorry that I come in so too frequently probably. And,
please.
You know, ADB has been supporting ISA through one of our regional technical assistance projects. And in fact, at the moment, we are trying to develop, you know, support solar resource development in places like Sri Lanka and Nepal, and obviously, you know, in other countries too, through this. And Solar Alliance can, you know, International Solar Alliance can definitely catalyze currently ongoing efforts of these countries through various forms of assistance. So ADB is backing ISA to support this and to develop different business models, different infrastructure requirements in these countries, so that eventually ADB, World Bank, and other financing institutions can come and invest in this along with the private sector. And currently, actually, in Sri Lanka, we are supporting development of 2 solar parks, mainly for private sector investments, but looking at possible business models and recommending these to the governments. So that's a major thing what ISA can do within the region for sure, and outside, even outside the region, and bringing in lessons from other regions too. Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Thongia, you have any thought? Yes, please, Mahua, please.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead. Thank you. I want to just pick up on what Priyantha also said. Like Priyantha, I also think that an organization like ISA is very nicely structured, you know, in that they're focused on solar, and that helps eliminate a lot of other distractions. One of the areas which is, to me, seems a little bit low-hanging fruit, but I could be sounding completely naive as I say this. In Africa, let's take for example Africa. Power pools are very, very useful because each country just doesn't have enough demand or supply, and even if it did have enough demand over the future as economic growth grows, just simply not big enough to make or de-risked enough to make substantial investments. So power pools play a slightly different dynamic. Take for instance West Africa, where a West African power pool is governed largely. A number of francophone countries in that area have a single currency. That immediately eliminates a whole lot of investment risk by just having one single currency. So, the development of power pools is not to be underestimated, and completely take the point that Prabal said and others as well, that, one of the big fears, or one of the big issues around anything cross-border is just fear, it's just political fear. Whereas power pools are essentially, well, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done as well, but they form a nice little investment territory. The Southern African power pool doesn't exist. Well, it does exist right now, but it just doesn't have enough business models and instruments in it. So for me, it seems like, well, that's a nice little area to focus on that ticks your cross-border concerns or cross-border ambitions in exactly the way that Priyanka said. We're not putting up a plant somewhere else for our own needs or doing mutual trans-border efforts. So I think the development of power pools should really come into in our thinking, and ISA is really nicely placed because a number of the countries that are currently ISA members are very well suited next to each other, close clusters that have not just enough variation in power supply and demand in these areas to form a nice little power pool, which immediately opens up the market for investments and structures and products and so on.
So
yeah, India.
I would
Tungia, please.
Yes, I would just slightly, I vehemently agree with much of what was said, but this is really the elephant in the room. You look at Southern Africa, not South Africa, like Mao was referring to. There is a huge asymmetry between South Africa and the smaller countries. And this asymmetry is really at the heart of the South Asian issue. It's very easy to get a hydro project in, say, Bhutan, servicing Indian demand, than to consider more neutral pool-based mechanisms. And here, when we do the math, Prabal and others have done a lot of analysis on this. When you look at the fundamentals, it's not as easy, because when hydro is surplus in the Himalayan region, it's actually surplus in North India as well. If you look at carbontracker.in, that's our website we run for real-time electricity all India by source. So you can see what hydro is doing with visualization and analytics. There is enormous seasonality. So if we look at all these instruments like, through ISA or SAC or whatever, these are enablers, but the fundamentals still come back to, frankly, the fundamentals, which is what is the structure system, which includes a bit of Mexico for the Western interconnect. Now, US and Mexico are vastly different. But yet, one of the ingredients that did work was strong enough utilities that could sit at a utility level as opposed to a generator project level. So we have to really step back. Are we trying to improve the overall grids of these systems, which is a much harder task, but with long-term value? Or the short-term value is really, hey, let's find demand, let's find a supply. And as long as people are win-win as opposed to givers and takers, then said project would continue. So we have to try and bring both of these together is really the homework ahead, I think.
In India, just wanted to add one more point to what Mahua said, that and what she recognized very well, that what is the difference between ISA and one solar, one world, one grid. The difference is the market structure. So maybe, as I understand, today ISA doesn't talk about market structure. It talks about creating a capacity within the country, but it doesn't talk about probably the market structure. And that's what is required. Like, we should also talk about ISA plus power pool. So that should become also way. So that kind of structure also we should start talking, where, because, and that's very relevant to African continent and Indian, this Asian continent, where not only that we create capacity, but also we try to evolve mechanisms to trade electricity, that solar power.
Yeah, Anindya, I would like to make a point here. See, I mean, to see, we should not be saying that we should develop green electricity for the sake of. The thing is that modeling results shows that when you develop green electricity, and because of the intermittency nature of these solar and wind, that creates a market for hydro of Nepal and Bhutan. So it is basically the push for green electricity. So the trade that is happening is basically a supporting. It supports. What it does is that it reduces the cost of balancing for India. The hydro from Nepal and Bhutan reduces the cost of balancing for India for integrating renewables into the system, and that is very important to consider. So it's not that we should just be doing trade just so that we can push green electricity. That's not the thing. We have to do green electricity because that is the requirement. Climate change is a matter of fact, and it is affecting our health, our economy. It will have long-term impacts. We have to include the carbon price part also in our calculation of cost, and that will make the hydro from Nepal very attractive in the Indian market. That is my first point. Second point is that see, if you look at the volumes, when we studied the volumes of imports from Nepal and Bhutan and to Bangladesh, those volumes, if you compare to India's electricity power generation, that's tiny, peanuts actually. And so, as Rahul said, there's a lot of hydro in the Himalayan region in India as well. So, so when our modeling assessment, we took this into consideration as well. So while India's hydro also gets developed, and it helps India to balance renewables in its grid, the Nepal's and Bhutan's hydro also finds a market in India because of India's renewable push, and that is the point. So basically, what does a power pool do? It increases the efficiency of the grid. It increases the stability of the grid. The grid now has many more power plants for making those balancing adjustments. So it's more helpful to the grid. So that way, more you have, better it is. That's the point. So it is everything. It is to reduce the cost of electricity generation. It is to improve the efficiency of the system. It is to reduce the fuel consumption of the system. It is also to promote the grid stability. And all of them are gains, technical gains that we have seen from a modeling study and across all experiences of power pooling in the world, across the world. Now, to your question, I would like to say, from our interactions with people in Bangladesh and Nepal, power producers, policymakers, stakeholders, you see what happens is, like India is installing solar power and wind power, of course they can do. And you will see that whatever India does, it has the countries like Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh, they follow suit, and the costs that are effective in India are also effective there. But in certain situations, like in Bangladesh, the solar and wind cost increases in Bangladesh. It's very high. Why? Because you have to add the risk part to it. Bangladesh has a lot of climate calamities, and because of that destroys the solar panels, wind towers, and so the risk factor is very high. So that adds to the cost of solar, putting up solar plants and wind plants in Bangladesh. So you can't always say, if we can do it in India, why can't we do it in Bangladesh as well? Or similarly in Nepal, and similarly in Nepal also. In Nepal, the problem is that they are a very developed, not even developing, they are an underdeveloped economy, and financing from their own resources is a issue. Here, I would say the institutions like ISA and Power Grid, Once and One Grid, have a very important role to play. What is required for developing the hydro potential in South Asia? Two things. One, a demand, and one, a supply. The demand is the market for those hydro. That will come when we have this interconnection of the grids and the one solar, one world kind of a thing. And supply is the financing part that organizations and platforms like ISA can be very helpful if they can pump in money in these countries like Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh, because and to help them, then of course they can they can build up their renewables also. And most studies show that the interconnections actually help renewables growth. So I would say that they are very important for we should simultaneously promote both of them.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. I think we'll just have to skip the Q&A session because it's already 12:30, and this brings us to an abrupt end of a very interesting discussion. I think I would love to keep on hearing it, and maybe our speakers would have to keep talking as well, since everybody is so full of insights. So I will just wrap up this discussion by doing a short summary from my notes. Please correct me if I'm wrong anywhere. I'm just speaking out of my notes that I've taken while you've been speaking. So at the outset, Dr. Vijay Tunga from ADB kind of outlined how political commitment at the highest level has been a historical challenge, and the fact that there is a need for India to take the lead now and need to move faster. And Mr. Anurag Mishra from USAID has said that cross-border energy trade. So we have to, we have to see how cross-border energy trade enables deployment of green energy. There are hydropower investments and there are long-term investments, and we have to figure out how there could be returns from that. And India needs to figure out even there, what could be the mechanisms to share costs. Mahua Acharya made this point at the beginning about how investments and the money that is to flow as green finance is kind of a complicated case, because we have, there's no linear or kind of, one sector, one thing where investment can be made. We have grids which are becoming unstable. There are innovative things like second life of batteries, and we need to kind of make the investment and have a vision now how to use carbon finance. She advocated a case for a business model for structured finance, even though it may have some different connotations. So basically her whole point was how investment can flow into different things in a different way. There are more areas of investment when we look at green energy. Dr. Rahul Tongia at the beginning also kind of mentioned this point that green is the new business as usual, not only because it's dirt cheap, but also because there is less money for coal and more money from financiers into green investments. But still the elephant in the room remains hydropower, which is also largely green and needs more development. And then Mr. Rajesh Mediratta kind of outlined the importance of a more interconnected power market, regional power market, that could probably take away risks and may make many more green investments in the region viable. Dr. Prabal Ghosh has made this point about balancing power requirements, and he said how the trade driving green energy can come not just from a normal supply demand scenario, but from the whole fact that India has a large renewable requirement, and how balancing power requirement for India could spur more green power trade between India and other nations, and we need enabling legislations for the same. Dr. Prabir Dey made some comparisons about how what India could learn, but South Asia probably could learn from ASEAN in how they have moved on electricity trading. He mentioned how they have more kind of political, economic, institutional support to make electricity trading a better success story than what there is in South Asia. And South Asia kind of needs to overcome lack of confidence and insecurity among countries about someone switching off power and blackmailing, etc., and political risks need to be part of the conversation when we make institutional frameworks and political frameworks, and for a power trade in the region. I think we have also spoken about the importance of the International Solar Alliance, and Mahua made this point about how it is very well structured. It eliminates a lot of distractions, and there is low-hanging fruit in development of common power pools. And this development of common power pools is a point also made by Dr. Ghosh later. Anurag Mishra made this point about how a cross-border electricity trade is not the only way to increase green deployment in the region and regional trade. And he said that development of green assets, CBT is just one of the elements to do that. And business models have to kind of change. And he again made this point of, say, Nepal, India, supply depending on renewables and balancing power and the kind of requirement that there is. I think from my limited notes, I have been able to do justice to all your points and bring all your points here. I would now like my colleague Malvika to thank everybody over here. Malvika, over to you.
Thank you, Anindya. That was a really, informative session, and thanks for putting together, the thought process and, really summarizing the discussions. It's been a real learning for us as well. And really from the point of the Asia Foundation, what struck me was the discussion on inclusivity, and specifically looking at how, how can we also make financial solutions as inclusive as possible, and to ensure that the inclusivity doesn't, it doesn't really reduce quality of the same service. I found that quite interesting and very unique to a lot of the discussions we have on power and power trade, and similarly also the pieces on how countries can feel less divided as those who are powerful and those who may not be. So our gratitude, lots of thanks to all of our speakers, because I know over the past few weeks we've been coordinating quite a bit for this session. It's been extremely valuable. We have recorded the session. We are definitely sharing the same with colleagues across our 18 TAF offices and also in our social media platforms. As Nandita had shared earlier, this conversation, these dialogues are a continuation of what we look to take forward. This has been a really in-depth roundtable of issues. So our many thanks to all of you. And we look forward to sharing the recordings to the network and keeping the conversation going through other mediums of engagement as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Very nice to have you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Anindya.
Bye.
Thanks, Nandita.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.